to start with our panelists with the question of what excites you about the call for the new professionalism? Who would like to start?
Why did everyone look at me? I can jump in, and actually I'm going to do it by talking about some of the depressing state of the current state of the profession, and because it is what gives me optimism. I mean, they say never let a good crisis go to waste, and we spent a lot of time today talking about how we have a crisis of achievement, and yet we don't know exactly what to do next and how to take advantage. And I think this panel today can offer some ideas, because the teachers themselves are incredibly dissatisfied with the current state of their jobs and the systems they work in. And Evan will tell you, you're going to hear from 4 excellent teachers on this panel, and they can share their own anecdotes, their own data. But let me just give you a couple of, I think, pretty jarring data points. So it turns out that half of American adult workers are extremely or very satisfied with their jobs. Only a third of teachers are. A third of working adults experience frequent job-related stress. It's 60% of teachers. And only 22% of teachers say they experience difficulty coping with that, compared to only 7% of other working adults who are similar in terms of education and type of job. Almost a quarter of teachers say they intend to leave. That's actually over a third for Black teachers and 28% of Latino teachers and 20% of white teachers. Only, and this is one of Evan's data points, but only 16% of teachers right now say they would recommend the profession to others. We have teachers who are largely dissatisfied. Their well-being is suffering. We know that not all teachers are as successful as all of their counterparts, and we know that not enough young people are choosing teaching. So let's use that crisis, and like what makes me optimistic is there's actually some innovations and some things you're going to hear about here today that are about building real professionalism that we can put in place. And I got excited in the fall. We had a round of conversations reaching out to school district leaders, reaching out to teacher groups to say, would you want to partner in some of these innovative areas? And every single answer was yes. You're solving a need that we feel right now. You're helping us get to more coherence, and we want to be part of that. And please sign us up. And I don't usually get a full round of yeses when we do that kind of outreach. And so we'll hear more about that. But there's a real impetus for change that we should feel optimistic about, instead of only feeling downtrodden by some of the challenges we face.
So I get optimistic when I read this part of the report, because it's one of those moments where I read an educational report and it aligns with lived experience. Too often as a classroom teacher, I read a report and it feels misaligned or out of touch with the reality of what's happening in the classroom, especially post-COVID. But when I read this section of the report, I'm optimistic because I know this works, not from data, but from my own experience. So I'm in year 20 as an advanced placement U.S. government teacher outside Columbia, South Carolina. Still teach every morning. I taught yesterday morning before hopping the plane to get here. But my work experience for the last 10, almost 15 years now has been very similar to what the report's recommending. And so I know it works from my own experience. In my 5th year in the profession, I was selected by my principal for a lead teacher position in my school. And my high school is broken into 4 houses. If you're a Harry Potter person, think of Hogwarts and down the line. That's exactly how we run it. So I taught for half of the day, and the other half of the day I was some hybrid version of a dean of academics and a teacher evaluation coach. And that was life-giving to me. It was energizing to me. But I know from my experience, it made me a more effective teacher, because I was seeing what my colleagues were doing around the building across curriculum areas, and I stole good ideas. That was brought up earlier. Good teaching is just stealing. And I know it made me a more effective colleague, and I hope it made my colleagues more effective, because coaching came up earlier. Well, the person running the evaluation for my colleagues was not an administrator who hadn't been in the classroom in 15 years. It was the guy who taught 35 seconds ago. For the last 5 years, I still teach in the morning, but now I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs for South Carolina's largest teacher association. So I teach U.S. government in the morning, and then I hop on the interstate and I make it to the State House before they ever get around to doing business for the day, and I'm interacting with the government. It makes me a more effective teacher. The stories that I bring into the classroom are far richer than they would be, But that is only possible to me because I have a district level administration and a school level administration that was willing to be visionary enough to think about a new professionalism instead of looking at my crazy request to be part-time teacher, part-time lobbyist and go, no, that's not the way we do things. We got full FTEs and this is how you're going to do it. So I get optimistic when I see a report that aligns with what my personal experience shows me works.
And just to build on that, the experience that Patrick described, what makes me optimistic is it's not just Patrick that wants that type of a role. Broadly, that's what teachers are asking for. We heard, I think, earlier on a panel that the sort of one teacher, one classroom model is broken, that it's giving us the statistics that Jen just talked about, how disengaged, unhappy, unsatisfied teachers are with the conditions of their profession because they want what Patrick just described. They want roles that allow them to have a lot more time for collaboration. Over 65% of teachers are saying more collaboration is one of the most important things to keep them in the profession. They want roles that allow them to have differentiated compensation or to specialize in what they're focused on. I think the challenge is how we get from here to there, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, but what makes me optimistic is there is real demand, authentic grassroots demand for teachers for the types of changes that are described in this report that we just need to harness as we roll out these new initiatives.
So I can't speak for the profession as a whole. My experiences with large urbans. I'm the superintendent of Houston ISD. We have 11,000 teachers. Before that, I was a CEO of a charter network, and before that, Dallas Independent School District, where we had about 10,000 teachers, and then another district before that. And you know, I'm an optimist by heart, but I got to say, I'm happy we're having this discussion, because we have not been honest over the last 10, 20, 30 years about the profession. And that is, we have a lot of problems and we're not always that professional. Patrick is a unicorn in some ways. I mean, he's by far superior than most teachers that I would expect. And we have a lot of great teachers doing great work. But we also have a lot of teachers not doing great work. And we have not differentiated, we have not culled, we have not removed teachers who are ineffective, and that's just the brutal facts. There's been a lot in the last 5 years, for example, of teachers, and I'll just speak again for urban districts. I don't know that much about rural districts, but there's been a lot of call for more mental health days. And we need to be honest and say, look, in Houston, teachers, you get a week off at spring break, you get a week off at Thanksgiving, 2 weeks off at Christmas, 10 PTO days, another 5 if you've been in the profession a while. You get 8 professional development days, 6 national holidays, 2 recess days, and 40 days in the summer. And we need to say, as a profession, if you need more mental health days than that, this is not the profession for you. And nobody wants to say that. And so I'm optimistic that we'll have that conversation, that some people will be brutally honest.
Thank you. So the next question is, how will we know when we've achieved the new professionalism? And we'll just work the other way, right? So we'll start with you, Mike. How will we know we've gotten there? What is success to you?
In the end of the day, we would be a great profession, and we've reached where we need to be if we get the outcomes that our students need. Yes, we have to define those, not just reading, writing, math proficiency. People talk today about critical thinking, or I call them year 2035 competencies. When we are there, when the students are taken care of and they're getting the outcomes that we need, then we probably have the profession. We can hardly say we're a great profession when over the last 20 years we've not closed the achievement gap hardly at all, and we're getting the outcomes that we're getting. We can hardly say we're a great profession when 97% of all teacher evals are proficient or higher, when the outcomes are as bad as they are. So for me, it's outcomes and actually taking care of the kids the way they should be taken care of.
Thank you. Evan?
Well, I totally agree with what Mike said, and I don't want to just repeat it, so I'll try to come up with something different.
Yes, you do. No repeating on this panel.
So I'm a relatively new parent, and In 1999, the government surveyed parents across the country, and one of the questions on it was, would you be happy if your kid became a teacher? And over 80% of parents across the country said that they would be happy or very happy if their child became a teacher. We asked that same question nationally last year, and it was down to 51% of parents across the country. Still a pretty high number, but I think we would be back in a place where the teaching profession had prestige and respect and was effective if we had parents across the country saying, absolutely, I would be excited if my child became a teacher.
What year was that? The first one?
99.
In 99, 80% of
80%.
people would have been happy for their child to choose the teaching profession.
Now
And
it's at
in
50.
2024, it's down to 51%. Okay. I really appreciate you saying that, because for me, it would be when everybody in this room would encourage their children to consider the teaching profession.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead, Patrick.
So Mike did take the best answer, because I love in the report that it's outputs focused. If we have a new professionalism, but we don't see a change in student achievement, we just redecorated for the point of redecorating. My teenage daughter loves doing that. As her father, I do not. And so I serve on the National Assessment Governing Board. If I don't see change in NAEP data with a new professionalism, I don't really think that we hit the mark. But since we're not doing the same answers. Two things. Number one, in the report, one data point that really grabbed my attention was they cite a survey that shows teachers to be the most trusted profession. And, I know there's surveys out there. Consistently, teachers are toward the top, Congress is toward the bottom, everything falls in between. But what strikes me as an advocate for teachers when I see that data point is the misalignment between what is said in terms of how teachers are viewed and how teachers view their respect in the community. So every year I survey our membership in South Carolina about a whole comprehensive range of issues to build our policy positions. And one of the most striking data points is always asking teachers if they feel respected by certain groups. Well, they feel overwhelmingly respected by their colleagues. They feel respected by their students. I mean, that's always above 85%. They feel respected by the parents and the families of the students they serve. But when you get to administrators, and then when you get to policymakers, less than 15% of teachers are saying, I feel respected by those individuals. So to see a report that says teaching is the #1 respected profession in America is misaligned from the lived experience of teachers. And so I think success in a new professionalism would bring those two into positive alignment with each other. And then the last criteria would be the same criteria I take to my approach as a teacher and my approach to the advocate, as an advocate, which is really simple. I want every child in this country to have the same teacher in front of them that I want my 2 daughters to have in front of them. I'm dangerous as an educator and a parent because my girls now go to the same school where I teach. I know which classrooms I want them in. It shouldn't be that way. I should just be able to say every teacher is a great opportunity. And so a new professionalism should create an environment where it's not about wondering, did you get the right teacher? You're in the right spot just by being in the school.
I guess ditto isn't going to work. So maybe what I'll add to this, all of these incredibly thoughtful trust, respect, prestige outcomes, is that could take us a while. And so if I think in the shorter term, I'd like to see a lot more at scale redesigned teacher jobs. I'd just really like to be able to say, point to get asked a question, give me 10 bright spots and be able to say, I got 20 for you. I got them in rural, I've got them in urban, I've got them in every state. It's a right to work state, it's a union state, where teachers they aren't treated like interchangeable widgets, where they have the opportunity to lead other teachers, where someone who's great at teaching phonemic awareness is doing that for all the first graders, and the person who's really good at math is teaching all the first graders math, and they work collaboratively. And that's the norm, not the innovation. So if we could try to, in the shorter run, maybe 5 to 10 years from now, see that at scale, I think we would be really on the path toward these longer term goals.
Thank you all. Patrick, this one's for you. What are your thoughts on the tension between teachers as professionals versus teachers as labor?
I think it's a natural tension because at the end of the day, yes, you need labor in a school building. You have to fill positions because you have to meet the needs of students or what laws or regulations may require. But I think ultimately, if we look at teaching as labor only and not as a profession, I think that we are shortchanging not just the professionals, but more importantly, we're shortchanging the students that they serve. So one of the trends that I wrote about recently that I've wrestled with over the last few years, the term's been used today, but not in the classroom context, which is the term with fidelity. I've struggled with that as a teacher because when I started teaching 20 years ago, with fidelity was not a thing, but now increasingly it is a thing, that the key to educational success is to find the right curriculum pack and to implement it in the classroom with fidelity. To me, that's treating teaching as labor. Certainly that's better than nothing. That's better than popping kids on a software program for 5 hours a day and just letting it work them through. But I think that it robs the students of the professionalism and skill and the humanity that the teacher brings to the classroom. Yes, we need high quality instructional materials. No, we don't need people on teachers pay teachers. But to simply say that if you're on the pacing guide on day 5, and that's the goal, I think we rob the fact that teaching is far less robotic than it is artistic. And that's certainly been my experience both as an educator and as a parent. So I think that the natural bent is to look at teaching like labor, especially when we look at things like teacher shortages rates. I mean, that's a huge report every year in South Carolina that I wait for with bated breath, is what's the vacancy rate this year in South Carolina. It comes out right around Thanksgiving, which is terrible timing, but that's how we do it in our state. But it goes deeper than that, because ultimately it's about the individual impact on the student in the classroom, and I think that professionals using their skill and using their artistic license are what move students to where they need to be and where we want them to be, more so than just putting widgets into a machine.
Would anyone else like to expand on that?
I think there's a balance somewhere. If we were the profession I think we should be, then Patrick, I would agree 100% with you. There is an art to teaching, for sure. There's an art to adjusting your instruction in the moment. There's an art to taking a question from a kid, and it may be kind of an off-topic question, but then turning that question for the whole class to respond to, that's tied back to the objective, so it's back on point. That's an art that, not anybody can do that. At the same time, my experience, at least, in these large urbans, again, I can't speak to any other type of schools, except maybe some charter schools. My experience is that a lot of teachers are inexperienced, they don't have certifications, or they're hired and they're not effective, or they're really progressing at the beginning, which makes sense. They're new teachers. Those teachers need some real guidance. They need some real structure, and they need to teach and use some basic things with fidelity. I'll just give one example. Engagement strategies. Engagement strategies is something we do all the time in the profession. But I will guarantee you that in a group of 20 teachers in X urban school, they have 20 different ideas of what engagement means if somebody or some group doesn't define it. And, all people looking at me right now are, do you engage? If this was a classroom of kids, could you say that? Even if everybody had their hand raised, is that engagement? This notion of, well, then let's cold call and that's engagement, so I'm a good teacher because I cold call on kids. Is that engagement? Is that a good practice? I mean, now you get into the real art and stuff that we do, and many, many teachers cannot engage kids at the start, and they can't use what we call multiple response strategies unless they are trained. And they need to do that with fidelity.
Yeah, I think one thing I would maybe to pull these two things together, like art requires a huge level of skill that's developed over time. And I think we don't do a good job of developing teacher skill over time to set them up to be artists. And I agree, great teaching is a combination of deep competency and a core set of skills, as well as the flexibility and autonomy to be able to make decisions to engage your classroom and your community in the way it needs to be. I mean, I think about this in New York City, where we do a lot of work. We've been helping with the rollout of new literacy curriculum in New York City. And prior to what's called NYC Reads, which is 3 high-quality curricular materials in all elementary schools that are chosen at a local district level, and then all teachers implement it. Prior to that, every principal chose their own curriculum and their own professional learning. And that did not free teachers up to be flexible and autonomous and artistic. It actually just created overwhelm. So if you were a teacher and you changed schools, you were totally learning something new. If you were a student, we have a huge transient population of kids in New York, you went to a new school, you were totally confused as to what was going on. And so I do think that we need to break down this perception that standardization eliminates flexibility and sort of teacher empowerment. Because I actually think from some level of standardization, you can free up teachers, once they reach a level of competence with those core sets of materials, to be more creative and more autonomous. So I think it is a combination of these two things that we need to focus on. And that, to me, is a profession. When we look at most of the things that we consider a profession, whether it's the medical field or the legal field, there's a core set of knowledge and competencies and skills. And then those that are really great can maybe go beyond that and tweak that and make it their own.
Well, and the report talks about progression over time, right? So you're not expected to be the same teacher at year 20 than you were at year 1. And if you are, that's not a professional, right? So the beauty of professionalism, and I think that it even merits a conversation of how do you define professionalism? Rick gave us a definition earlier today from the standpoint of someone who's willing to be held accountable. For me, it's a growth over time is a critical component of it, and being committed to that growth over time. So,
You know, Holly, one of the things that struck me from the Measuring Effective Teaching study from about 15 years ago, Tom Kane and others.
was it 15 or like?
It's been a long time.
Ooh,
2011.
Somewhere
Okay.
around there, was that there's a lot of evidence that shows that people really work on their crafts year 0, 3, and then 5 to 10. But after about year 10, there's not a lot of differentiation. And I do wonder if in the truly transformed profession we're talking about, where you've really honed that craft of being a proficient teacher in your classroom, now you're taking on the next challenge. You're the lead teacher, you're the coaching other people, you're learning a new subject area, you're doing something different. I wonder if we would start to see those numbers change as well as our results. Because I can't imagine actually being in the job for 30 years, but not getting a lot better for 20. And so to me, that's also part of this professionalism, is continuing growth and challenges, even when we've reached a level of quality.
so how do we
To keep us
build?
inspired.
Yeah, I think it's worth thinking about how we build that in intentionally. And I think one of the great parts about the report for me is it looks at the classroom as the unit of change. So having served on the state board in Louisiana for 12 years, I became convinced it was the district that was the unit of change. This report pushes it all the way to the classroom. And for someone who loved my season in the classroom, I won't argue against that. I think there's beauty in the unit of change being in that classroom level. But if we are flipping that system, if that hierarchy is getting flipped and that focus is all in the classroom, what are the things we can build in so there is that growth over time? And I think that's some opportunity that we'll see with this new professionalism.
Can I jump in there?
Please.
Because I don't want to ignore what Rick said earlier about accountability. If you want a true profession, you have to have accountability. And then we have to define what that looks like. Because that word gets thrown out, and then there's very little accountability. And it intersects this unit of change business, right? If it's a classroom, who's accountable? Right now, we have a profession that is hardly accountable for poor instruction or poor performance. Very little. In Houston, we've changed that. In Dallas, I changed that. There's great accountability. And I can tell you what that looks like, but it's not about Houston, it's about our profession. What does it look like to hold somebody accountable? And I tell you, If you can go on year after year and not get outcomes, that's not accountability. And so if it's going to be at a classroom level, the unit of change, okay, what does accountability look like? Does that mean they will hold themselves accountable? Will principals hold them accountable for not getting outcomes? Does that teacher get year after year a step increase in stipends, even though performance goes down?
So, Holly,
Go for it, guys.
ditto on that. But the one other thing that struck me in the report is the report takes the time to define professionalism, and the accountability for results is part of that. And I agree with Mike. We need more accountability for results within our profession. That's part of how professions work. But the report also talks about professions have high entry points. That you have high standards for entry, and I think that we fall short in that area in the teaching profession too often. And I think it's caused by the tension back to profession versus labor is we've got to have a teacher in the classroom. And so I get it, if you're short teachers or you're short educators in the building, you've got to fill the vacancy. But I think that by lowering the standard, you make the profession less appealing to the very workforce you're trying to attract. It's almost like a field of dreams, if you build it, they will come kind of scenario. I think that if the standards for the profession are raised, then in turn you attract greater talent into the profession. And I think that that's another part of the report beyond the accountability piece that resonates as well.
Yeah, let me add to that, because I think it's all, this notion of vacancies and shortages is wrapped up into the profession also. Both in Dallas and in Houston, I've been in Houston a year and a half. And we've started these massive reforms, whole-scale systemic reform, we can talk about some other day. And at the start of this school year, we had only 48 teacher vacancies out of 10,640 teachers, whereas everybody around us
Has that ever
had
happened before in Houston?
hundreds. No, and those vacancies were specialty ones, and we have 1,879 SPED teachers, and 12 of them were vacant because of special ed certification requirements. Anyway, and the reason why we have so few vacancies is not just because we raised salaries and we had the highest salaries, but because we've said this is challenging. We have an employee value proposition that's publicized, and it says, if you join HISD, you'll be visited often, you'll be on paid performance eventually, and bum, 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 bum. And these are the supports we're going to give you. But it's challenging. And every elite organization out there, every elite one, has always done better with hiring because they are elite, but they make sure there's a bar, and they know it's a challenge. And it will attract people who want to step up to the challenge. So the original thing we need to do, I think, is make it a choice to join a district that is challenged and will be challenging, but will support you in your growth.
So connected to all of this, our current system in my home state of Louisiana has school accountability and district accountability. And what happens is each time you do school accountability, you're getting an average across the school. When you do district accountability, you're getting an average across the district. That's where you're getting information that's farther away from the kids. That's where, you can't really tell where things are great and where things are poor if you're looking at averages. I think some power behind going to that classroom level and talking about accountability at that classroom level takes away that we're not averaging out a district. We're going to look classroom by classroom of how things are happening in this particular school. I think it would be powerful. And Patrick, I would be willing to bet on establishing those expectations, providing that support, and then knowing that if people opt in who are not at the level that you expect them to be, knowing that they're not going to stay there for 30 years, right? I'd rather take a bet on you for 1 year or 2 years and try it out, which it sounds like what you're doing, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
No, no, no.
No, I mean,
I
it
agree with
sounds
what
like
you're
what
saying.
you're doing is that you're telling people you have high expectations, you meet those expectations, you stay. You don't meet those
Make
expectations,
more money.
there are other things you can do.
That's exactly, I mean, it's spelled out fairly clearly, but also it's all connected. I mean, it's whole-scale systemic reform. So the spot, what we call spot observations of the classroom, what is expected of the teachers clearly outlined, but then the evaluation system is individualized. So the unit of change is not the teacher. In our case, the unit of change is district, but the assessment is individualized.
And just, I mean, maybe full circle for me, because when I started teaching, it was 2011, and I was a measures of effective teaching teacher. In my first year, I had the camera in my room. I got the video observations all the time. It was awesome. It was the best feedback I ever got. But then when we rolled out teacher evaluation systems across the country as part of Race to the Top, they didn't stick in most places. We heard they did stick in DC, and now you're bringing this back in Houston and Dallas.
And in Dallas.
Yeah. And that's not, in Tennessee, there are other places that have meaningful evaluation systems in place. But I think I just want to name two things that you're doing and that DC did, and that is both the support and the reward. That a lot of places we rolled out accountability without the support and the reward. And I don't say this to make excuses for it, but I saw it firsthand. That we had tons of teachers that felt like, okay, now I'm going to be held accountable. And I agree, not that many actually were held accountable, but there was the threat and the fear of accountability coming, and yet there was no benefit. There was no additional compensation. There was no differentiated compensation. Leadership roles in districts were not defined by your ability to be effective in that. And so I just say that this does need to be the full package, that with accountability needs to come the support to feel like if I am struggling, there will be opportunities to grow and improve, and that feels real and tangible, and there will be a reward if I am high performing, so that you build a sort of self-interest and buy-in into the system as well.
We have a phrase that says, accountability without support just breeds fear, but accountability with supports creates a high-performance culture. One other thing, Eric Hanishek and Steve Rifkin and several other professionals were involved in a research study of Dallas's pay-for-performance system. You can find it in the National Bureau of Economic Research study from March of 2022, I believe, or 2023. So recent publication, and shows unequivocally that the pay-for-performance system in Dallas that I implemented has had long-term benefits on achievement and, by the way, on staff retention.
As evidenced by your only 48 vacancies.
Well,
right?
yeah, this is Houston, the 48 vacancies, but over time, we'll show the same thing in Houston.
And I
Right.
think what's really important about what you're describing, Mike, is that I heard you say teachers sign up for this, and amongst those are these routine classroom observations. I love that as a teacher because A, I want people in my classroom giving me feedback. I don't know how to get better if nobody tells me what I'm not doing right. I can self-evaluate all day, but there's something to be said for a third-party independent evaluator. But the report talks about accountability reframing, and I think part of what causes the rub within the profession when we start talking about holding teachers accountable is over the last 25 years, since No Child Left Behind, accountability has become synonymous with one-time high-stakes test. Accountability is more than that. The report talks about the need for a broadly defined set of measures that you're using, like classroom observations, and I think the profession can rally to that. Not to drag in the 45th sports analogy today, since that's what happens when you have a former NFL quarterback on stage. But listening to him, I think, resonates with that, because when accountability for the teaching profession is boiled down to a singular number on a singular test, which is not what Mike's talking about in Houston, then it would be similar to me to holding a coach accountable in a sporting event solely based on the final score of the game. Yes, the final score matters, as Andrew Luck said today, like you want to win. But if you're not looking at, oh, half of his starting lineup was injured, or, there's more to it than just that one number. And so when you create that broader set of accountability, I think it becomes more appropriate and fair to the professional, but it makes a more attractive profession as well, because you know that you're looking at a holistic body of evidence and not just a singular point in time.
Evan, you shared a data point with me a couple of months ago when you polled teachers, and it might have been Massachusetts, and it was the tension of they want summative data, but not, can you share, just,
Uh-oh.
assessment keeps coming up today. I've been really fascinated that when we've gotten into kind of policy ideas, it's been science of reading and assessment accountability. And I think there's a political gridlock on assessment change and a huge desire for assessment to be maintained and for them to be changed. And I thought your teacher data underscored that tension, and I hear it here.
Now I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but
Just make them up, give them the general.
good, great.
80% of the stats are made up.
No, but what we know is true from our polling of teachers across the country is that the vast majority of teachers do think that they should be held accountable for student learning over time. That they want to know their student learning over time when you ask them that question. Then they get really worried when you say, do you want to be measured based on your end of the year state standardized test? So it is a framing and messaging because they don't view the state standardized test, for whatever reason, as a measure of student learning over time. I think if there were embedded measures throughout a curriculum, they might have more faith in that. If they actually saw the connection between their end of year assessment and the year prior's assessment, they might have more faith in that. But I think we have a lot of work to do to build confidence in the assessments that we use. And this played out in Massachusetts, where when we polled our teachers, they thought there should be end of course requirements. They thought there should be a clear graduation standard, and yet they did not support the MCAS test. The majority of teachers did not support the MCAS test, which was those things. And we had a really hard time trying to think about how do we talk to teachers about this issue to help them understand that this is the thing that they say they want. And part of that has been the political fights around assessments. Part of that has been their unions messaging around these issues, not to minimize that. But we have a lot of work to do to help teachers build confidence in the measures of student learning that we are using, that it's actually reflective of what they are learning over time.
Let me defend teachers at this point. The measures of effective teaching, MET study done around 2010, 2011, pointed out what, Jen, what you're saying, Evan, that there's got to be multiple measures, and achievement is only 30 to 40%, should be 30 or 40%. And then there should be other components of the evaluation. But to go back to why this is a systemic problem is that we have a lot of principals who go into classrooms only once every 6 months or once every few months, or they're not instructional leaders themselves. They can't tell the teacher how to improve. And so it does feel like, wow, you're coming in, you've seen me twice in a year, maybe, and then you're trying to hold me accountable for good instruction or whatever it is. Or you want, because the rest is subjective, I got a principal who doesn't know what they're doing, they're not instructional, so what do? They say, well, let's put most of it on an end-of-year evaluation. That's not fair. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not research-based. That's not how DC does it. It's not how Dallas does it. It's not how Houston does it.
Not how any of us are evaluated.
Yeah, exactly. So I can see why there's that hesitancy from a lot of teachers to say, look, I don't want, my evaluation shouldn't count for much because I've got a leader who doesn't really know what I do.
My last formal observation before I moved to the professional certificate in South Carolina was from an administrator who stared out the window at the pond outside my classroom. Beautiful view from my classroom, and kind of like being on Stanford's campus. But in the post-evaluation conference, the feedback was, I have no idea what you were doing, but the kids seemed engaged, so you're good.
Yeah.
Like that, as a professional, that actually, like, part of me was like, okay, cool, I'm on a professional certificate now. But as a professional, I was like, really? Like, this is what I'm getting at the, I worked hard to prep for this observation, and I got, I don't know what you did, but look good.
And that's what DC did, for example, that was different. Just to name it, they put this cadre of expert teacher coaches in place who were AP government or physics or 7th grade at pre-algebra, like who knew the content and the pedagogy for that subject area. And they came in and did the consistent, frequent, multiple observations, the really actionable feedback, not just at the end of the year, here's one big post observation conference. And teachers grew in their practice. It didn't actually cost that much either. They were able to spend a lot of the money on compensation and rewards, but by having this highly selected cadre of teacher leaders who do know the subject matter, who can provide. Teachers got better, the system has gotten better, kids are learning more, and I'd love to see that be what we're talking about now. If we can't necessarily upskill principals to do all of these things, but what if we have lead teachers like Patrick or Holly who, that's half their day,
I want to challenge that notion.
okay? About principals?
Yes, because the best coaches are principals. Here's what's happening in the profession right now, and this is what mixes things up. You have lots of vendors and contractors and consultants and companies out there, and no offense, but when it comes to instruction, the best way to do it systemically is to have your principals be strong instructional leaders, that your district and their executive directors. We have 274 principals, 645 assistant principals. That's the scale that we're dealing with. And so the challenge is getting 674 principals all on the same page, all to be instructional leaders. That's another session, another day. But that's the best way. Instead of, we hire a company like Houston had when I got there, and I changed all this. This group was teaching principals about instructional practices. A different group was teaching this set of schools about engagement and teacher practices. Another group of consultants teaching this group of teachers. And it's like, okay, so is it all aligned? Do the teachers have to do what the consultant says? Is anybody accountable for it? Is the principal holding the principal's not even showing up at the training of the teachers? They don't know what, I've been a consultant, I still consult a little bit, and it would drive me crazy. I'm training principals, the executive director's not there, the superintendent's not, nobody's there. I could be telling them, I could be making up shit, which is an official term of art for us. Yeah. But that's a problem. So one of the things we had that drove people crazy, some people crazy, is we had a phrase, and we stuck to it: no vendors on the field. Now, we need consultants to do all kinds of stuff, just like a football team. But on the field, it's only the coaches that tell a player how to throw a tackle, how to run a route, how to line up, how to run this play. It's only coaches that we have, not anybody else. And so you can imagine it drove a lot of the people angry because we're a $2 billion organization, and there were a lot of vested interests in their practice.
I don't know if we're saying something so different or not, because I would never say the principal shouldn't be an instructional leader. They have to set the tone and the vision. But in the football analogy, there's a lot of coaches out on that field. The special teams coordinator.
They're all on the team, though. They're all
They're all working on the team. And that's what I am excited about, with the idea of not trying to invest everything in the one visionary, excellent principal who's going to be in the role for 4 years and then move up to principal supervisor and then assistant superintendent. I'd love to see it be more like, you're the special teams coordinator, you're excellent at punting. What's the equivalent of that? Maybe inclusion for special ed kids. We do have different strengths and gifts. That principal needs to lead that building, but I think we need to take advantage of the teacher assets in a building and just organize time differently. I don't think a 4th grade teacher should be teaching English language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, 5 sessions a day with 1 planning period by themselves in a classroom.
We're departmentalized.
With 5 different curriculums that look very different, and really maybe a grade level meeting once a month. So I think we need that leadership, and we also need to instill the capacity and find it within our pretty proficient teachers who are there in the building, and they're just being asked to only reach their 25 kids and not have a greater impact.
Thank you for all of that. I'm going to revise the next question because you guys have answered that in a great way. And I just want to get to the specifics. So the original question was thoughts on teacher responsibility for services versus results. The report is clear that the North Star is the results for students. I think that what we should talk about is how do we get to those results? And I know I've heard a little bit already, but I'd like to hear, what do the results look like in Houston? What are you guys shooting for? What are your goals? What kind of measurements matter to you? Are there a whole bunch of measures, or are you honing in on a few key areas?
Again, Houston's a little bit different because it's a state takeover district. So a year and a half ago, the Commission of Education of Texas took over the district for failure to improve. And they removed the elected board and then put in a board of managers, and I was appointed the superintendent. So it's a little bit different than my Dallas experience and Harrison, Colorado Springs experience, et cetera. But the question still is pertinent. But I tell you that because there's two sets of goals. One is a set of goals to get out of intervention. That is to have 0 schools with D or F rating, before we can get out of intervention. How many do we had at the start of my tenure a year and a half ago? 121.
Out of how many total?
274. So that's kind of big, big challenge. The second goal was to conform with state and federal law on special education and to improve SPED achievement. The third goal is a board goal, and that's improved board governance. So those two have to be there, and to get out of state intervention, to get out of DNF status, you have to meet certain, you have to improve reading, writing, math, college and career readiness, graduation rate, things like that. But there's another goal I put in place, or another set of goals, and that is year 35 competencies, because I wasn't just going to go in and just do reading, writing, math, science, and just think that's okay, get out of intervention status, when I know that the world is changing, the workplace is changing, and we need some different competencies. It has to do with whole-scale systemic reform. I'll just give you a short 20-second version, and that is we also want to improve our kids' skill in the art of thinking, which is information literacy, problem solving, critical thinking. We actually have exams beginning, middle, and end of year around that, and we have now 130 schools doing that, and that will expand. We expanded programs of study to make sure that our career tech ed programs are upgraded. We started AI electives in the high school, all geared towards year 2035 competence. I can go on more, but that's generally it.
So you guys have identified the results you need to be successful for the students in Houston. And in a way, those goals are articulated by the state, but you've added on to those goals to make sure that it's not just about coming out of an unsatisfactory status, but about truly serving the community where you are. Thank you. So unions came up in the earlier conversation. My situation is different in a right-to-work state. I can't relate to all the things that was said already about unions, but there is this notion of solidarity that has been prevalent in the teaching profession. And so Patrick, Mike, whoever would like to talk about it, I'd like for you to talk to us about that notion of solidarity versus a notion of reward for distinguished performance, and what that has looked like in your experience, what you hear from educators about it. How do we make it possible?
Solidarity is a big part of the teaching profession because it is a collective exercise. I think by nature, educators flock to other people with a like-minded focus on student achievement and student growth and the well-being of children. And I've heard the tension loudly today. South Carolina is a right-to-work state like Louisiana, so I don't have the experience that has been referenced at other points today, but I think part of the tension that I see in South Carolina, because our state superintendent is being innovative and forward-thinking in terms of strategic compensation and trying to deliver some of the packages and incentives around compensation that Mike has mentioned in Houston. is striking a balance between a profession wanting to have those opportunities for growth and those opportunities to be rewarded for a job well done. Like, I think there's an inherent human desire to be rewarded for good work. Like, I just think that I'm not a sociologist or a psychologist, but I just think that's true in watching my students go through their work. And so that desire is there, but I think that we also have to acknowledge that for too long, the teaching profession at large has been marginalized in terms of compensation related to other like professions. It's just a simple reality. And so, for example, in South Carolina, as recently as 5 years ago, a first-year teacher made $31,000. You can want higher pay and opportunities for achievement and strategic compensation and incentives, but you can also, in a stand of solidarity, say nobody doing this job should be doing it for $31,000 a year in the year 2019. And so I think what's moving the needle, certainly in South Carolina, is while our superintendent has pushed for these strategic models, she and the governor have also clearly articulated a goal by 2026 of getting minimum starting teacher pay statewide to $50,000, to what I would consider to be, certainly in our state with our standard of living or cost of living in South Carolina, that's a working salary for somebody coming straight out of school, in a way that $31,000, if you've ever been to Charleston, you're not living in Charleston at $31,000 a year. And so striking the balance between making sure that the profession at large is a profession where all educators have the ability to earn a living wage that can support a family and support growth in the profession, if that precondition is in place, then I think you see stronger support across the profession for the implementation of incentive-based pay structures, because at the end of the day, I can't do my job well if there aren't an army of teachers in my building also doing their job well. I've got to teach AP US government. If the English teacher isn't doing their job well, I only have so many minutes in the day, and my students don't want to see me for more minutes than they already have to. So I need a strong teaching workforce around me, and I think that's where the solidarity element comes into it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, I'll go after you.
So at Educators for Excellence, we work in all of the big districts that were talked about earlier: Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City, Boston, Minneapolis, all with very strong labor unions. And a lot of our work is about getting teachers to be, in part, more involved in those unions, because by and large, very few teachers vote in union elections. On average, across the country, it's about 16% of active teachers vote in their union elections. So union leadership is often not very representative of where the aggregate teacher position is. And at the same time, teachers really want their union. When you poll teachers across the country, whether they are in a union, whether they are in an association, or whether they're in a charter school environment, over 80% of teachers say they want and think that teachers should have access to unions. So they want unions, and then at the same time you ask them, do you agree with your union's current negotiating priorities? And then it's only about 35% of teachers that tell you, I agree with my union's priorities. And I think a big driving factor of this is that we have tribalism in all of our politics. And I think there is solidarity on the people that are working side by side with you every day. And if you're seeing some of them get attacked, it does feel like an attack on you. And so I think in the reform movement, we've made some big mistakes in the way we talk about teachers that has fed into that tribalism. But otherwise, I totally agree with what Patrick said, that I think by and large, teachers show us that, yes, they want to increase compensation for all teachers, but that does not mean they are opposed to differentiated compensation tied to performance, tied to roles, tied to impact with kids. I think they are very open to that, depending on how it's messaged, and as long as there's a set standard there to start from.
I don't think you need a union for solidarity and teamwork. In fact, I think just the opposite. I think the union has been the #1 barrier to success in the education profession for the last 20, 30 years. And I'm a person who agrees with the right to assemble, the right for unions to exist and try to get better working conditions. But the way they've gone about it is their interests are tied to different outcomes or different priorities for the school system. You talk about putting student-centered work, that is not their first priority. That is the adult is their first priority, and they openly say that. So that is in direct conflict with student-centered or, putting kids first. So what we're doing in Houston, what I did analysis, yes, we're a right-to-work state, so we don't have a master agreement, but the union, the associations still have plenty of power over elected boards, is we're supporting teachers despite the union. So we raised teacher salaries $8,000 in 1 year in Texas, now having the highest salaries of anybody in the area by far. And that was without union participation. We've improved their professional development and their practice, the curriculum, the lesson planning, their work-life balance, all without the union. And we are already finding more and more solidarity and teamwork in the schools as a result of the things that we're doing and what the principals are doing to support the teachers. So, I say, let's flip the switch on that. We don't need the union. We need to support teachers. We need to give them a livable wage, help them with work-life balance. We don't need the union to do that.
Say more about work-life balance.
Yeah. So one of the things as a profession, we want teachers to be able to go home 15 minutes after the last bell and not have to work on any lesson plans or anything. That they're done. They work hard during the day. They have high-quality instruction. They are coached like football players on the field, but when practice ends, they're done. That's what we're hoping for. And so what we've done in Houston so far is at least in 130 schools out of the 274, and it's now creeping into all the other schools, we provide the PowerPoint, the lesson plans, the demonstrations of learning, the bell work, demonstrations of learning or mini quizzes, the answer key, the differentiated assignment every day, differentiated assignments for kids who are further behind. And the teachers love that because they're not getting on teachers pay teachers. They're not having to find resources after work. They leave at 4:15, they are done. There's only one requirement to meet, and that's Thursday afternoon from 4:15 to 5:15 for 1 hour across those 130 schools, and the other schools also have to meet for an hour. Other than that, they don't have any other meetings scheduled after school. They can go home, they can have time with their family. We're going to try to keep doing that and expanding that. By the way, this notion of autonomy, we found that of the other schools, 140 other schools in the system, 93% of all of our schools are using the curriculum we provide and the lesson plans, even though they don't have to. Go figure. The real practice and professionalism comes in internalizing that and then delivering that. There's no curriculum that teaches. There are no pieces of paper that teach. There's no piece of paper or curriculum that adjusts in the moment, that takes a question and turns it into a question for the whole group. That's the art of teaching. That's the profession. That's the professionalism. Let us do all the other stuff. Teachers are not experts at curriculum alignment, most of them. They like that we give them the stuff. And by the way, the stuff is grade level material until you get to the differentiated material. But the lesson plans, the PowerPoints are grade level instruction. We can have a long debate about, will teachers teach grade level instruction? We know in our profession they don't on the whole, especially in underserved communities, maybe in other places. So that's what I mean by work-life balance.
I appreciate that. And I was happy to hear you bring it up when we talked earlier, and I definitely wanted to make sure that we addressed it here today, because I don't believe that we talk enough about that, is that historically, even if you envision a teacher, they're walking in with all these extra bags and walking out with all these extra bags. And so I think you talked about the mental health days earlier. I imagine you'll need fewer mental health days if you truly are unplugging and meeting your responsibilities with families and whatever hobbies you have outside of being a teacher. So I really, as someone who started in the classroom, I really appreciate you bringing that up. So we're going to turn to the audience in just a minute. So I want to let you know we are going to allow the audience to ask questions. I'm going to skip through a couple of questions that we have. So if there's anything I'm skipping that you guys really wanted to make a point on, let me know. But Jen, this has come up a little bit in this notion of innovation in teaching. And so I've heard you sprinkle that into the conversation already, but just want to create some time for you to talk about innovation in teaching, because it sounds like that's what it's going to take to turn around some of the statistics you shared with us at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, so my organization worked with a number of foundations and a number of teaching advocacy organizations and something called the Coalition to Reimagine the Teaching Profession. And there were these two sort of simultaneous side-by-side efforts. And we looked all around the country for examples of innovations that are having impact. We tried to find statewide examples. We were able to find some district-wide examples where it's not just a couple classrooms or case-by-case examples, but really where there's an intentional plan, sometimes negotiated with the union and embedded in contracts, and really came up with a framework that talks about 6 different characteristics of strategic staffing. We've talked about several of them. Distributed leadership, where Evan's not asked to do the things Evan's not really good at, and he focuses on the things he's great at in a group with other people. We've talked about this idea of leading other teams of teachers and teaming with intentional teams. Some of the other characteristics are things like technology that optimizes the use of teacher time, not necessarily go sit in front of software, but there's a really very new piloting nonprofit called Course Mojo, where they're tapped into about half a dozen of the best high quality instructional materials out there, and they're training the AI technology to help teachers differentiate with the grade level standards. So it's actually integral to the lessons, but it's like 15 minutes at the beginning. It's not the full classroom, it's not a station rotation, but it's really deeply connected into the work. And it doesn't say that teachers have to be able to reach students who are really far below grade level, at grade level, and advanced on their own in one classroom and doing all that simultaneously. It's getting some help for teachers to do that. Another thing we haven't really talked about is all the other people in the building, like the paraprofessionals or the instructional assistants. How do we use them really effectively? You've talked about student engagement strategies. You go into a lot of classrooms and it's the paras who are sitting and talking with students who might need some extra help. How do you actually build those into teams and compensate people differently? And then again, compensation to recognize all these different responsibilities. To do that, you have to have equity focused, stable leadership. You have to have trusting relationships. We talk a lot about unions at the end of the day. A lot of this comes down to, do you spend the time to build relationships with people and to try to meet each other somewhere where each other are. And you need to do that in order to see these innovations. But a couple places, Edgecombe County in North Carolina, they've been doing public impacts opportunity culture for a number of years, but that got scaled up a bit with some state level support. And so they have an achievement leader role who is responsible for multiple classrooms. Actually, they're held accountable, not just for the 25 kids on average in their classroom, but for the whole grade level. And to do that, the other teachers kind of work with and for that teacher. And then they have paraprofessionals who are called REACH associates who help make it happen. And that's all done together, and by design, and it's embedded and compensated. It's the expectation. It doesn't just happen because smart people sat down and said they could do it. And they've been able to do that in a rural, eastern northern North Carolina school system that doesn't get a lot of fresh blood. They hire locally, and they have to be creative. So there's a couple schools here in California that are in year 1 of doing some other things around team teaching. Like I mentioned earlier, like that real life example, one teacher is teaching writing, another is teaching phonemic awareness, another is teaching math, and another is helping with special education, and they're doing that for all the 4th graders. And they figured out how to make the school day work, and they figured out how to make the contract work for it. And it's year 1. They all feel more satisfied with their job. They're reporting that they're seeing faster, kids are learning faster. They're getting on to where they should be earlier in the year than is expected. And parents and the students seem happier, and it's not tracked. It's just well designed. That takes a lot of effort to get there. So we've got to have some support to make these innovations happen, but I think there's just a lot of latent demand, as people have been saying, and what we need are some places that are willing to build on the 15 years or so of this and try to take it to scale. We need some states. We need some states that are willing to go big on this.
Are you guys doing any kind of publication of the work?
A bunch of people are. So we've
Okay.
got a framework on our website that people can go to and download that has some of these examples. And then in this next phase of the work, some of these funders are funding about a dozen planning grants to try to scale this to new places, and then a few implementation grants to go scale the piloting and testing of it to more places. And then a smaller number of implementation grants to really go big. But there's a storytelling and publication element of that. I think it'll be led out of Teach Plus. So I don't know if you have any more details on that.
Yeah, and on the Coalition to Reimagining the Teaching website, there are case studies and examples of some of this already.
Okay.
But I think your point is right, that the challenge, the question is, how do you take this to scale? Because in most of the places that it is happening, there is a lot of outside support. There's a truly visionary set of leaders. And we want to think about how do you actually, institutionalize this so that it is built into the system, so that it can last, so that it is sustained, and there are mechanisms for this to continue to improve over time.
Thank you. I look forward to checking it out, learning more. Is there anything else that we had talked about that you want to be sure to share before we turn it over to questions from the audience?
Just to build on this, one other thing that we are working a lot on is this question of how do you embed this in CBAs where they exist? And so we are doing a lot of work at E3 to start to analyze contracts in major districts across the country and identify here are barriers to being able to really shift roles in the teaching profession, to change pay, to change how you can use time. And a big one that I think is going to be one of the hardest to address are class size mandates across the country. These are baked into many state laws. They're also baked into many contracts. And if you actually want to shift how we're using teachers and time,
Yes.
it means you're going to have larger classes and smaller classes and working groups and other things. And so one of the most, the first thing that most legislators put money into is class size reduction because lots of parents, it sounds good, it feels good. And so I think one huge political hurdle we're going to have if we actually want to rethink the structure of the profession is how we deal with class size mandates in a way that doesn't feel like we're just saying every teacher is now going to have 50 kids, but that we're actually going towards ratios to make sure there's still the appropriate number of teachers, but we aren't limiting schools' ability to be flexible, to make different decisions based on class size.
Well, I think you did a beautiful job of circling us back to the report and the fact that we need to move away from all of these inputs and mandates, and we need to give authority to people closest to the students and focus on the results there. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to a question. If you could share your name and your role, we would appreciate it.
Hey, my name is Bob Banning, Chair of House Education Committee in Indiana. I've really enjoyed the panel. I think you've done a good job of explaining a lot of the report. One thing that wasn't mentioned in the report that I personally think we might have overlooked is differentiated pay. And I wonder, I really appreciate what Mike is doing in your school district. I'd love to have maybe you come to Indiana at some point in time because it sounds pretty amazing as to how you're turning around districts. But can you speak to differentiated pay? I think in a professional system, I just can't imagine with the demands we have, for instance, in the private sector for STEM fields, to think that I'm paying a STEM teacher the same thing I'm paying a PE. Even though I see the value of both, it's just market is going to drive, forces are going to drive that in a way that's going to make it more difficult for us to get those people. So I'd like to response from that.
I'll start. Yes, we have, in Houston, we have what's known as a hospital model pay structure for 130 schools. And starting next year, we'll have the pay for performance model. The pay for performance model is differentiated based on performance. So the higher your achievement, instruction, and other components, you get paid more. The hospital model is, I think Houston's the only one in the nation using it as far as a large urban. And it's differentiated pay based on the position. So for example, a 6th grade language arts teacher starts at $86,000 in Houston today, even with 0 years of experience. We only count the first and second year. When you get to the third year, you get a different pay, and then fifth year, but it's all high. So 0 years experience, $86,000. However, the social study teachers only make $72,000 or $74,000, and the elective teacher makes $68,000 or $70,000. I don't have it in front of me, but so it is differentiated based on the value of the position that we have, and we have to be honest about it, and we say, because we have a lot of kids who are behind. We're 92% free and reduced lunch. We started way behind the state average, and so we have a lot of challenges. Kids can't read. So if you're a 6th grade language arts teacher and your student body, only 20% of your kids can read, then you better be a surgeon, and we should pay for that, even with 0 years if you get hired. But if you are teaching 3rd grade PE, I'm sorry, we have to be honest, that's not as valuable, at least in a district like Houston, as a language arts teacher. We're still going to give you a decent pay, $70,000 or $72,000, which is more than the starting salaries in the area, but it is definitely not, $86,000.
So is that district-wide? Because I know that you've talked about the differentiation between your lower performing schools. So it is the hospital model.
The hospital model is in 130 schools.
Is 130. Okay, so the schools where you're really trying to emphasize growth.
Yes.
Okay. Did you do the hospital model in Dallas?
No, we did not. We came up with it in my charter network called Third Future Schools.
And I'll just say, the combination of those two things, there's also broad support from educators for, both differentiation based on role and responsibility and based on student population. And actually, that's the thing that there's the highest level of support from teachers for, is differentiation if you are serving the highest need populations of kids. Because every teacher understands that every classroom is not the same and that the job is actually substantially harder in some classrooms.
Also offer that in Louisiana, the funding formula allows for it. I don't know if districts are actually using it or not. So we have a statewide incentive fund, and the districts can do it, but I'm not sure that any are actually doing it.
There's really interesting stuff, like Detroit pays all of their special educators now $15,000 a year more, and they are using IDA funds as part of the mechanism to cover those costs, because they had so many vacancies, and they went from having hundreds of vacancies in their special educators down to having 7 at the start of this year. That's one other example.
I appreciate that. I have a follow-up question that you did speak to in class size, and I agree totally with what Evan was saying about having larger classes. You can pay teachers, especially highly effective teachers, more money just by the fact they have class sizes. State law is part of the problem, but the unions are a good part of the problem too, where the unions constantly negotiate for smaller class sizes. Can you speak to how we can negotiate with the unions to get that changed? I could easily change the class size at a state level. I think the other thing is you have to change consumers' minds, because parents think smaller equals better, but the reality is a great educator can actually work miracles with even larger classes and still have a greater impact than a bad teacher in a small classroom.
So I'll offer 2 things to that. One, I think it's, if you're talking about how to navigate the politics of that, you have to look at kind of the hospital model. You have to look at different, not all teaching situations are the same. I can teach 50 advanced placement seniors all day long. Like that, bring them, that's fine. If you put 50 second graders into a little bitty classroom with 1 adult, safety to the side, learning is going to be really hard in that environment. So to Evan's point earlier about ratios, some of the most successful models is getting away from class size. In South Carolina, the Meeting Street School model in Charleston has been really successful, and they put 2 adults in every classroom. So you have that backing. The other thing you have to look at is it's less from the educator perspective about the number of kids in front of you, and it's more about the workload associated with it. So I'm telling you, and I'm going to channel Rick Hanashek for a second. I can teach 400 advanced placement students a day. I can manage that. I cannot grade their writing. Like, there's a breaking point. There's only so many hours in a day. It takes me, I've read for the College Board, I am a wildly efficient scorer of free response questions. I still am going to need 2 minutes a question. And if you give me 500 students, there's not enough hours in the day. Because when I get home, I'm going to have a list from my wife and daughters that have nothing to do with scoring those essays. So Rick often advocates for give your highest performing teachers more students to instruct, but give them support with tasks like grading, similar to the graduate assistant model at a university. So I think that's the other part that has to be navigated there, is it's not just about the arbitrary number, it's about the workload associated with that number and how can you offset it in a meaningful and appropriate way.
And a lot of the international studies will show it's not less adults, it's that you have your highly effective teacher in front. You have guides on the sides basically supporting, so I get what you're saying.
And that was what I think the point Evan had brought up about the ratios. And so it's moving the conversation, shifting that conversation from the class sizes to the conversations about ratios could be a way for you to enter that conversation. The other thing is, you've told us you can make the change at the legislative level, right?
I also think there's places where they've set up a process for schools to actually be able to solve this on their own. So there are contracts, CBAs, and unionized.
What is a CBA?
Sorry, collective bargaining agreement.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
A union
I
contract.
was getting close to that in my head,
Yeah.
but anyway.
A union contract.
Yeah.
And there are places where they've actually they have a ratio, district-wide ratio for the schools, and then they let the schools actually determine in the building through a committee, how do we want to allocate those ratios? And in low-performing schools, often they just do it flat. We're all going to have 27 kids or something. But in the higher-performing schools, you'll actually see that they've adjusted that and that they've moved those things around. And when you can tie compensation to those decisions so that you're doing exactly what Patrick just described, giving your best teachers either more students or giving them time to mentor and coach others and then giving them compensation that goes along with it. So I just think it needs to be whole-scale systemic reform, because if you just do the ratios but you don't have the compensation and the teacher leader roles, then I think it does break down. And I think that our reforms need to be both the accountability and the reward and the support all together for them to actually have sticking power.
In Third Future Schools, we purposely, at the Charter Network, not only do we have the high salaries, but we purposely have numerous teachers teaching 2 classrooms of kids at one time, 50 kids. We pay them more, about $10,000 more. We put a teacher assistant in there. We call them learning coaches. And we do that partly to save money, because this teacher, this high-paid teacher, we're saving on that by just giving them $10,000, and we put a teacher assistant in there. So because there are many teachers who can teach 50 kids at one time, with a teacher assistant. And so that is a purposeful strategy in Third Future Schools. We're going to bring it to Houston after another year.
At the appropriate time.
Yeah, at the appropriate time. Thanks.
Make it through a few other fights.
Yeah.
So this is something that I had a dinner table conversation about is, and I think it goes back to that first or second question of how do we know when we're successful? And part of it for me is when we're promoting within the classroom, right? Is that in order to get a promotion as an educator, it's not me becoming an assistant principal or a principal, but that my promotion is in the classroom somehow. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. It goes back to some of the practices that Jen's talking about, and then Evan is telling us that he sees in the polling data. And it's the reality of what Patrick gets to live every day, right? So I serve as a principal. It's an amazing season in my life, but I loved being a teacher. And I wish someone would have figured this out a long time ago.
So you can make more money,
That I
you can
could,
do different things, you can continue growing,
right,
but you're still putting that first love at the heart of the job.
I don't have to
There's
leave
so
the
many
classroom
teachers
to
who
get
would
that
want that.
promotion. Yes, absolutely. And think about the results we can achieve with our students when we make that possible. So I don't see any other questions. You guys have been amazing. You were inspired me to get on the plane to come here because I wanted to have this conversation with you all. I want to thank the Hoover Institute and the Futures Council for all that you guys have put forward, because as someone who has started in the classroom, I read into this so much beauty and so much possibility, right? So I want to be able to encourage my children to become educators, and I want all of our students served well. And I think, Patrick, that point you made about the solidarity, and we need great teachers working alongside us because it makes our job easier. I think that's an interesting way to think about that notion of solidarity and just the opportunities available. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Mackie. Yes?
So I want to appreciate, along with my New Year's resolution, leading with gratitude, the hardy folks who have stayed to the very end. Give yourselves a hand. This has been a long, long day. I hope your brain is exploding as much as mine has. I want to thank this panel and all of the other presenters today. We have had a phenomenally rich set of ideas and discussions today that have been far greater than I could have hoped for, and it is their bringing of their own life experiences and their own thinking to add on to the earlier work that we presented that has made this such a successful day. However, everyone here is going to leave with a little bit of homework. If you wouldn't mind using your cell phone to capture the QR code, we would love to hear from you if you will share your ideas with us. For those of you that were enthused by the program today, we're happy to connect and find ways to engage further. For the rest of you, it's absolutely okay that you don't like these ideas. It's absolutely okay that they hit you in ways that just bring the boil. But if that's the case, you have extra homework, because then it's your job to come up with better ideas. I think everyone here ought to be on notice that we collectively have to acknowledge that the status quo cannot continue. And we can't just slide back to that because this work is hard. So I am going to say we have so much potential and possibility and enthusiasm for doing something else. And if the recommendations of the Education Futures Council are not the right something else, let's work together to make it the right something else, come up with something different that's better, and I guarantee people will move to that. But let's make the commitment that we have to move forward to a new idea and then find ways to make that happen. I'm convinced the public is with us on this. I'm convinced that legislators are with us for the most part too. And so I don't consider this out of reach. I want to remind you, we have already built a brand new education system. It's called charter schools, and we did it successfully, and it's in 46 states. We have a model of legislation that can guide us in how we would do another model. So it's not out of reach. We have lots of ideas of we have lots of information about success that we could harness together. We have lots of ideas about how to celebrate and elevate teachers and administrators to help them bring their best work forward. And if we worked all of the pieces into a single idea, I'm pretty sure that that would have phenomenal legs. So I will leave you with the charge of bringing your imagination home with you and trying to cultivate it. And as you leave today, please remember the bookstore continues to be open at the end of the reception area, and the imagination trolley full of cafe books is still in the lobby. You are welcome to take any of them that you like. I have extra book bags if you want multiples. And the shuttles will run home, back to the hotels starting around 5:30 until 6:30. So please go get your refreshments. You have earned them. And thank you all for staying all day long. This was a great day.